Good morning everyone, and thank you for joining us on this webinar today. My name's Tori and I'm the Marketing Officer at Connecting Up. Our webinar today will be presented by Ryan Jones from Connecting Up. He will give you an overview of Office 365. If you have any questions, please type it in the question box on your webinar panel and Ryan will work through them every few slides. This webinar is being recorded, so after the webinar we will send you a link with the slides. I'll hand it over to Ryan to present the webinar.
Good morning everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Like Tori said, we're here today to provide you with an overview of Microsoft Office 365 for nonprofits. The really important part of today's webinar is to answer all of your questions and make sure you get a really good idea of how Office 365 can help your organisation. So at any time, if you've got any questions, fire them through and we'll work through them one by one. And stay here until they're all answered. So the first thing I just wanted to do in this webinar, and if you've sat in on one of these before, I've changed it a bit. First thing I want to do is just explain a bit of the benefits of cloud software. So Microsoft Office 365 is Microsoft Office in the cloud, and it benefits from the same benefits of normal cloud software. So these are flexibility, reliability, and the ability to stay up to date. Now, in terms of flexibility, very often I speak to organisations that have a really old server on premise and they need to add more users but their current server doesn't support it. Or they want to add some kind of software to their server but they need to spend $10,000 upgrading a server to do that. Cloud software allows you the flexibility to add users and scale your organization's IT requirements without hardware investment. All of the servers are stored in the cloud and it makes it very easy to manage your IT. They're reliable because they're hosted by big cloud providers with guaranteed service, multiple data centers and automated backups. The thing with Microsoft Office 365 in particular is this is not a solution necessarily that's designed just for non-profits. These are enterprise plans. So these are used by big corporate organizations with 20,000 users. So Microsoft need to make sure that these are hosted with guaranteed service and there is failover and backup protection. And the other thing to remember is because it's in the cloud, it's always up to date. So if you're using Office Online, for example, all the users are always on the same version, all the users are always on the same version of Exchange, Outlook, all those kind of things. So you know what your users are using and you can better support them. And the other thing is your servers are always kept up to date by Microsoft. So no more patches, no more massive software upgrades to get your server ready for a new piece of software. It's just kept up to date. And at the end of the day, what that really means for organizations like ours is peace of mind. We don't have to worry about all of those things and we've got much more reliable service. So today, we're not talking about the kind of Office 365 you can buy from retail stores. You've probably seen a box like the picture on the screen from places like JB Hi-Fi, Harvey Norman, those kind of places. Microsoft are now donating their enterprise version of Office 365 to not-for-profits all over the world. The major difference between Office 365 that you can buy in the shop and Office 365 that Microsoft are donating is the cloud server infrastructure. I'll go into that in a bit more detail shortly. So what is Office 365? Office 365 is all of your favorite Microsoft Office tools. So you get web-based versions of Word, Excel, PowerPoint and OneNote, as well as the ability to interact with Office 2013. So Microsoft haven't forgot Microsoft Access. You can still use Access on the desktop, and we'll go into that in a bit later. You can work collaboratively on documents. A great example is if an organisation is working on a grant application. Now I know that everybody on the webinar is probably very organised and has their grant applications done many months in advance, but sometimes they sneak up on you and you need 6 people in your organisation to work on them the day before the deadline. A lot of organisations would usually cut that up into sections, email it out, get people to work on their different sections and email them back in. Now with Office 365 you can all work on the same document at the same time, and Microsoft have a really clever way of checking out the paragraphs that somebody else is working on. So there's no conflicts because you're prohibited from editing a paragraph somebody else is working on, which means you can all work on the same document at the same time. That also is really handy because you can pick up where you left off on different devices. So if you have a desktop computer in the office and you're working on a file and then you need to leave the office and you want to open it on a tablet, it'll pick up the same point you were at in the document when you were last editing it, and you can continue on with your work. Obviously there's mobile apps to edit your documents wherever you are now, and they're available on pretty much every mobile platform. So whether you need to work on a document on your iPad, on your Windows phone, on some kind of Android device, there is a version of Office 365 that's able to do that. You also get access to some really cool tools like Microsoft Lync, which is like a corporate version of Microsoft Skype to make voice and video calls. You get OneDrive Pro with cloud storage, and obviously the servers that will go into a bit more detail in a minute.
We've got a question from Glenn. Do you also get Visio, Project Manager, etc.?
No, Visio and Project are separate. So with, we'll go through the plans in a bit more detail later on, but with the plan that includes Office 2013 Professional Plus, you get everything that is included in Office Professional Plus, which isn't Visio and Project, they're still separate. Okay, so why would we want to put Office in the cloud? Well, I talked a bit before about the example of collaboratively working on files, but the main thing is that you can access your data wherever you want it, whenever you want it. So you've got centralized document storage for your organization, which means that if you're on the road or if you have staff or volunteers that telework, they can always access the important files that they need. You get automated backups, so all your Office files are secure, and you don't need to run your own servers. Now, a lot of what we've talked about that Office 365 can do, we've been able to do for quite some time. Microsoft have made Office web apps available, Microsoft Exchange, Microsoft SharePoint. All of this has been available, but the problem is for a lot of organizations, you need to set up a server, you need to then manage that server, and it becomes very cost prohibitive very quickly. All of a sudden Microsoft are donating this, and it makes it a lot more realistic for particularly small organizations to be able to have access to enterprise grade infrastructure at a cost that they can afford. So let's have a look at Microsoft Exchange. In the majority of ways, it's very similar to Microsoft Exchange that you're already using. Exchange is powerful web-based email. One of the great things about Microsoft Exchange, though, is it integrates calendars and email together very easily. Now, you can do things like shared calendars so that you can see when your colleagues are in a meeting and plan meetings around that. You can also use Exchange now to track assets, things like meeting rooms, projectors. I even met an organisation recently in New Zealand that used it to book out fleet cars. And what you're able to do then is you're able to book a meeting essentially with these assets, book them out for a time and know who has what asset when, so that you know what's available and what isn't. Microsoft give you a huge 50 gigabytes of storage per user, and you get access via mobile apps so that you can access your email wherever you need to. Now, if you're already using Exchange, you can access Exchange Online in the same fashion that you already do. If you're using Outlook, Outlook is essentially the desktop client for Microsoft Exchange, where you can check your email from Exchange using Outlook on your desktop. If you're using other email, it is possible to migrate it over to Exchange. Now, the great thing about Exchange is it uses all of Microsoft's security and privacy technology to stay secure, and you have access to the rest of the Office suite through Exchange as well. So if somebody emails you a Word document, you can click on it and open it in a new tab in your browser or whatever you might need to do.
Glenn's got another question. Could you please define user, group or person?
Well, at this point, a user is a user with a mailbox. That sort of thing gets a little bit more complicated when you're talking about SharePoint team sites and things like that. But a user is each unique person that needs a mailbox, essentially. Does that make sense, Glenn?
Yes. Ruth's got a question. Is it fairly simple to set up an account with Outlook on your home laptop? Assuming you've already got Office installed.
Yeah, if you've already got Office installed and you've got Outlook on that computer, Microsoft make it pretty easy to add a new Exchange inbox. The other thing I should mention here is the support for Microsoft Exchange is very good across the board in terms of different operating systems, different mobile devices. If you've got an iPhone, you can, when you're setting up a new mailbox, you can click a button for Exchange, and Apple know exactly how to deal with that Exchange inbox. And there's similar options in Windows Mobile and in Android. And Mac OS is the same. Mac OS can detect an Exchange inbox and you can open those just fine.
Christy has a question. Can one use Outlook and Exchange on the same computer? Will they link and update actions in each?
So Exchange is the mail and calendar server, and Outlook is the client. So what you would do in that example is you would set Outlook up to connect to Exchange, and Outlook would grab all of the data from Exchange and send it all back. So if you created a new calendar entry, for example, in Outlook, that would be synced in Exchange, and that means that if you're on the road and you need to access your email from, say, a internet cafe, you can easily log into the web portal and all of your email and everything will be there just as you'd left it on your desktop.
Are there any big differences between desktop version of Outlook and cloud-based, i.e. will there be anything missing? That's from Melissa.
You know, there might be, but we've got to a point now where the cloud-based email is so good, it looks very similar to the desktop client. If you open the online version of your email and you open Outlook 2013, they do look very familiar, which is useful for users who are familiar with Office 2013 because they can see and they know where things are. There might be a couple of hidden things that power users might miss, but to be honest, I haven't found anything just yet. And actually, the only thing that might be missing for some people is some mail merge functionality. So I guess the main thing is if you want to make the step to Office 365, you can do it in a very familiar fashion by using Office 2013 and using that to connect to Office 365, and you can keep working the same way that you work now, just knowing that you've got this enterprise-grade infrastructure in the back end, providing you with your email and providing you with a reliable level of service.
Will the tasks be shared as well?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways of doing that. I might leave tasks for a couple of slides because we're going to talk a bit more about SharePoint, and that's probably really where tasks in Office 365 come into their own. Okay, so that's it for questions for now. So the next one is Microsoft Lync. Now, Lync is where you really start to see the power of Office 365 and having everything in the one place. So Lync is very similar to a customized version of Skype for your organization. You can do voice chat, you can do instant message, and you can do high definition video chat. There's mobile apps for all your different mobile devices, all the simple things that you'd expect from Skype. But where it gets really interesting is with the real-time presence information. So on my screen here you can see a conversation between 3 participants. And you can see the guy on the left, I think that's Brian. So Brian has you can see a small red bar next to Brian's picture there. So what that means is Brian is unavailable. Now Brian might be unavailable because he's currently in a call, or Brian could also be unavailable because Microsoft Lync has looked at Exchange and gone, oh, Brian has a meeting at this time, so Brian's not available. So I know that if I try and start an instant message conversation or if I try and start a video call with Brian, he probably won't respond, which is really useful if you need to, particularly with teleworking, particularly with multiple sites. You know who's at their computer, you know who's working at the moment, and who you can talk to. Now, the guy in the middle there, he's got a green stripe next to his photo. And what that means is he's available. He's available, he's in front of his computer, and he should be able to talk to me. And you can see on the right there, I think that's Bonnie. So Bonnie has a yellow strip next to her photo. And what that means is she may be available. Now when I say may be available, what Lync has done is Lync has gone to Exchange, checked her calendar, she hasn't got any appointments. Okay, so she should be green. But she hasn't touched her computer in 15 minutes. So what Lync says is, well, she hasn't got any meetings, but she's probably just stepped away from her computer for a while. So you can try talking to her, but she may not respond. So it's nice to know that, okay, Bonnie might be available, I can try her if I want, but you know, if she's away from her computer, at least I know that because Lync's given me that feedback. Now the other cool things that Lync can do are around screen sharing. So what I can do is I can share my screen with somebody else, and let's say, as an example, I'm not particularly good with some Microsoft Excel formulas, but my colleague Tina is really good. So what I can do is I can start a Lync conversation with Tina. I can say, hey Tina, can you just help me quickly with this really crazy formula I need to do in Microsoft Excel? Tina goes, yeah, no worries, I'll just do it for you. So what I can do is I can give Tina access to my computer. She can go into the screen that I've shared with her and she can make the change in front of me. But where this gets really powerful is the fact that I don't have to give Tina control of my entire computer. What I can do is I can just share Microsoft Excel. So Tina can only edit that Microsoft Excel window. She can't go in and change my security settings. She can't go and read my email. She can't do anything else. So that level of security makes a really viable option if you need to do in-home training for clients. You need to provide, you're dealing with sensitive data and you need to provide a level of support on just one aspect of your screen. It's a really useful feature. And then there's also things like virtual whiteboards, which are useful for meetings so that you can make notes and annotate as you go along. And the question I get asked all the time, yes, you can invite external people to join your Lync meetings. They can do it via a Lync web app. There is also a conferencing phone number that they can ring, and they can just use their phone line. They don't have to use the internet at all. So it's a really powerful, really versatile tool. Alright, so next up is OneDrive for Business. Now Microsoft have just increased the amount of space you get from OneDrive for Business. Each user gets 1 terabyte of cloud storage. Now somebody told me the other day that the average Word document is now 250 kilobytes. So 1 terabyte is 4.3 million Word files. It's a lot of space. And it's a lot of space that you can access from anywhere. You can access them on the road through the website. You can access them on your mobile device, access them through web browser, your computer, whatever you need. And you can access them from the cloud. One of the cool things that you can do with OneDrive though is when you log in through the website, you can click on the file and it'll open in Office Online, and you can edit it online, or you can choose to edit in Office 2013 if you've got Office 2013 installed on your computer, and you can edit the file on your desktop. You've got both options. Now, if you're going somewhere that doesn't have very good mobile reception, or you're going on a plane or something like that, what you can do is you can synchronize certain folders onto your computer before you go, and once they're synchronized you can work on them while you're away from the internet, and then just sync them back when you get back to the office. There's also really good document versioning tools. So if you accidentally delete half of your grant application or 3/4 of your PowerPoint slides, what you can do is you can go in and you can click on the file in OneDrive for Business, and you can ask to roll back to a previous version of the file, and you can see who edited that as well. So maybe Christine edited a whole bunch of work that I'd done, and it wasn't quite right, so we looked at it and we rolled it back and we made the edits from there. That's all functionality that we can do in OneDrive for Business.
Ruth has a question. What if you have Office 2010? Can you use that with OneDrive?
You can, just won't get the full functionality. So some things will work and some things won't necessarily work. This would be a good opportunity to make the upgrade at the same time, but I guess it depends on your exact circumstances. Personally, Office 2013 was really built to integrate with Office 365, so the integration is very, very seamless. Okay, so now we'll get into SharePoint. So SharePoint is many things to many people. One of the things that you can do with SharePoint is you can set up a public-facing website. So your organization you need a new website, you can set that up in SharePoint, you can use your custom themes and things like that, and it's a content management system that you can use to set up your public website. But it is also an intranet. So in terms of an intranet, you can have your typical kind of organization intranet. Not sure who's familiar with an intranet, but in a lot of cases it looks like a bulletin board. You can put up funny cat pictures, you can put up meeting minutes, you can put up whatever's important to your organization. But one of the great things about SharePoint Online is that you can set up separate SharePoint sites for different projects, which makes it really good for project management. Each project that you set up can have a site mailbox that the whole team can access. You can have a separate OneDrive area for files for just that project. So everybody involved with that project has access to those. And you can also set up tasks and timelines. So the question before about Microsoft Project, it may be that if you have a look at SharePoint, you may not need the same level of project functionality as you do now. It's very, very good for setting up a range of different things. And you can also install custom applications to be able to do certain things in SharePoint, depending on what you need to do. You can build it up to do what you need it to do. You can also customize it to make it look pretty. There's my colleague Marcus at Info Exchange has a great quote about SharePoint in terms of SharePoint is great because you can do so much with it, but the problem with SharePoint is that you can do so much with it. The main thing with SharePoint is to start by doing what can give your organization value, and then as time goes on and you get a better idea of what your organization can do and what your organization needs out of SharePoint, you can build on it from there.
Lana's got two questions. In regards to OneDrive and SharePoint, does the document identify which user did what edits? And will SharePoint enable outside users, as in employees, to access the project?
In terms of OneDrive, yes it does track which user did what. And so you can roll back to whichever user's last changes if you need to. It shows a list of what user made what change at what time, and so it's pretty easy to identify who did what and when. In terms of the other SharePoint example, you can invite other people into the project, give them access to the site.
Laura asks, how should you go about restructuring your old files to move them to SharePoint? They're not sure where to start, and how much storage does an organisation get on SharePoint?
So SharePoint storage is together with the OneDrive storage, so it would depend on your user's individual storage. In terms of structuring your files, that's more of a question for how you need to use your files. I'll go into in a little bit more detail later on about getting ready for 365, but it really depends on how your organization wants to work with the files. SharePoint can be set up and customized to work the way that you need it to work.
So Ruth just wants to clarify the difference between OneDrive and SharePoint. OneDrive is like Dropbox, which is personal, and SharePoint is like a server that all can access.
OneDrive is for file storage, and SharePoint is more of a website, I guess, that can interface back to OneDrive, but it'll interface back to the files that are stored on OneDrive. So what you can do with SharePoint is you set up your team site, and that's the portal where your team can communicate on a particular project, track your tasks and timelines, see the emails that are associated with SharePoint, but those emails are going to take you to the Exchange inbox, and you're going to be able to share documents related to that project, but those documents in the end ultimately are going to be stored on OneDrive.
And Glenn's just got the question, two of their team is using Mac. Is this an issue, and should they do Microsoft Windows?
It's not as big an issue now as it once was. The web clients for everything Office 365 are very, very good, and they work just fine in Safari, Chrome, things like that. In terms of Office, there is a new version of Office for Mac on the horizon. There's been no confirmed release date, but the new version of Office for Mac should sync very well with Office 365. As an example, this morning I was working on a Mac, and I was working on a PowerPoint file which was stored in OneDrive. And when I went to open that file and edit it, it asked me whether I wanted to edit it in PowerPoint Online or whether I wanted to edit it in PowerPoint on my desktop. And on the Mac, it opened in PowerPoint just fine, and I could start editing the file. So the functionality is there. It's definitely not as good as on Windows in terms of Office 2013, but it still works very well.
And Ruth just asks, are OneDrive files accessible to others?
Depends on how you set it up. Depends on your security settings. Actually, I will talk a bit more about that those security settings now, though. I get a lot of people asking me about how secure Office 365 is and how reliable it is. Now, the great thing about Office 365 is you can access your files from anywhere. But that's also the downside. And I was speaking to an organisation recently who their files were available from anywhere, which was great, but they didn't have very good IT policies and procedures around passwords. And they had an employee leave the organisation under acrimonious circumstances, and because they didn't have a policy around changing any passwords, that employee was able to log in and access sensitive files. Now, that is quite possible with or without tools like Office 365, but it's all down to how secure you set up your systems. So one thing that you do need to consider is how secure your passwords are, how regularly they are kept up to date, because at the end of the day, the most likely way for somebody to be able to hack into Office 365 is not through Microsoft. It's through poor passwords and insecure passwords that can easily be guessed and easily be worked around.
Laura just wants to check that all group documents will be shared in SharePoint. For example, their current public drive will be on SharePoint, but their personal docs will be on OneDrive.
So your public drive would also be in OneDrive, but you can customize how accessible that is. So you might want to set it up so that all users can access those files, which is great. But you may also have confidential areas that you want kept private. All of that is down to how you set it up. So I know that seems like a really weird answer, but that's the beauty of 365, is that you get to choose how that's accessible.
And Laura just asks, whose OneDrive will they be stored in?
Again, that depends on how it's configured. We did have an organisation at the last webinar who had something like 2 terabytes worth of organisation files. So it might be that they're set up under team sites for different parts of the organisation, but that's very much a migration question because it depends so much on your organisation and what you need.
And Ruth just wants to ask, do you have a share with others area and just my files area on OneDrive?
Yeah, you can set up your own folder which isn't shared with anyone, that's fine. And there would be certain areas, particularly if you've got a big central drive, there'll be certain areas where all of the files are shared with everyone. But, you know, again, at the end of the day, it depends on how you set it up. It is very easy to manage the security settings for each folder. You're able to click on them in OneDrive for Business Online and set who you share that with. All right. So in terms of the donated plans and the donated products, Microsoft are donating Office 365 Enterprise E1 for charities. And what that is Office Online, which is basically web versions of all of the Microsoft Office tools, all of the main ones, Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and OneNote. There's no online version of Access as yet, but you can store other files in your OneDrive. So if you want to store Photoshop assets, you want to store Visio files, even some Access databases, you can store them in OneDrive so that they're accessible to other people. You just can't edit them in, well, you can't edit a Word document in Photoshop, for example, or Photoshop document in Word, for example. But you can then get the benefits of the syncing, the sharing, and the backup. You get Exchange Online for your hosted email, OneDrive for Business, Microsoft Lync, SharePoint Online, Active Directory integration. For those of you who are using Active Directory, you can sync it with an on-premise Active Directory server. Yammer Enterprise, which I haven't really gone into today, but it's kind of like a Facebook, Twitter mashup for your organization. It can be very useful for short, quick feedback things. And you get 24/7 technical phone support from Microsoft. Now, all of that is free. There's no cap on users, and it's accessible right now through Microsoft at no cost per user. Now, Office 365 Enterprise E3 has all of the benefits of the E1 plan, plus you get access to the desktop applications. So you get Office 2013 Professional Plus. You also get access to the mobile apps. There's some more advanced email features, some more advanced business intelligence features, and some more advanced voice features for Microsoft Lync. Now, working with a number of organizations, 9 times out of 10, an organization needs the E1 plan, plus you can get Office 2013 Professional Plus donated through our donations and discounts program, and Microsoft will donate that license to you, and that can connect to Office 2013, Office 365. Now, the difference between the E1 and the E3 plan is there is a cost to the E3 plan. It's heavily discounted by Microsoft, and it's around $5 per user per month. So it depends on what you need. If you need the advanced email, the advanced voice, and the business intelligence, then E3 would be a good option for you. But don't use E3 just because you need those desktop apps, because you may find that the E1 plan plus the donated licenses works out better for you, especially if you've already got Office 2013. Now, how do you get it? You go onto that Microsoft website right there, which will be emailed out to you after the webinar, microsoft.com/Office365 nonprofits. You register there. Microsoft will check with us that you are a valid nonprofit, and the same validation process we usually do, and then you'll be ready to go. But, but in the meantime, you can get started with a trial, and once you started with the trial, there's no requirement to continue with Office 365. If you try it out and decide that it's not for your organization, then that's fine. But when you start the trial, you can also validate your organization with Microsoft as a non-profit to get that ongoing E1 donation. Now, in terms of whether you're ready for Office 365, what you need to upgrade, how you need to migrate, we have partnered with non-profit technology provider InfoExchange to provide Office 365 readiness assessments. So what they do is they provide you with a report on whether your organization is ready for Office 365, whether your IT infrastructure is ready, and what you might need to upgrade before you're ready to jump onto Office 365. You get an idea of key steps for migrating your organization to Office 365, how long it's going to take, what order it needs to be done in, things like that. You also get a detailed quote for getting InfoExchange to migrate your organization to Office 365. So that's going to be really useful if you want to, if you do want to make the jump. It's also going to be really useful if you need to get an idea of how much you might be up for when you are ready to move to 365. And it'll also include some future steps that you can take to get more benefit from Office 365. One thing I haven't really emphasized today is that all of these things that Office 365 do, they're all fantastic, but it's not a one-in, all-in type scenario. You might choose to migrate just your email to Office 365, and then as time goes on, adopt other features of Office 365 as your organization has a need for them. Just because SharePoint can offer you a public-facing website doesn't mean you need to replace your website. Just because Lync offers you this video conferencing doesn't mean you have to replace Skype. All of this is here if you want it, and one thing that your readiness assessment will do is it'll help you understand what you need to migrate your existing infrastructure, but there may also be things in there like later down the track you could set up SharePoint to manage your projects. And these are things that could add extra benefit to your organization, but rather than set up everything at once, just set up what is going to create value for you today and then work on the rest of it as you have the need for it. Now, if you need more information on the Office 365 readiness assessments, if you are registered with Connecting Up's Donations and Discounts program, just go to connectingup.org/Office365. If you're in New Zealand and you're a TechSoup registered organisation, just go to techsoup.net.nz/Office365. All of the information is on those pages, or you can get in touch with us after the webinar and we'll be happy to help you out. Now, have we got any last questions?
Yes, we've got a few. Melissa asks, would Exchange be the most intuitive application to move to the cloud first?
In a lot of organisations, yes, because you're already using some kind of email. Depending on what infrastructure you're using for that email, Exchange can give you a lot of benefits straight out of the box. It's also potentially, depending on your organisation, one of the bigger migrations to do, so it's useful to get it out of the way.
Tanya asks, in order to set up Office 365, what level of knowledge do you need to know to do this, or would you recommend an IT to set this up, and what would it cost to set up?
That's a really hard question, because it depends on where your organisation is sitting at the moment. I spoke to some organisations in New Zealand recently, and some of these organisations were using a shared Hotmail email address, and they had no real infrastructure at all. In terms of those kind of organisations, Microsoft have done a pretty good job of providing a point-and-click interface in Office 365. So it's not too difficult for somebody with a moderate amount of IT knowledge to be able to set up the basics. But where it comes in is migrating your existing systems. If you've got a series of mailboxes, depending on who they're hosted with, migrating those over to 365, that's really where the tricky stuff comes in. And getting somebody in is going to mean you're going to have a much smoother transition than if you just moved and had to sort out what you were going to do afterwards. In terms of costs, again, that's so dependent on how many users you've got, how much files you've got stored, which features you want to set up. I think the main thing for an organisation like yours would be to try the readiness assessment, which will give you an idea of, first of all, whether you're ready, second of all, what you need to do to get ready, and third, how much it would actually cost to do the migration. The other thing that you can do quite easily is go onto that Microsoft website, register for the trial. Once you register for the trial, you can try and set up your own mailboxes and see how you go. And if it is something that you can do yourself, then great. But definitely starting to have a play with it will give you a good idea of whether you need that extra assistance.
Melissa asks, so you can't edit photos within Word, for example?
You can do basic photo editing in Word these days, but something like a Photoshop file with layers and things like that, it's a good example of a file that you can't edit in Microsoft Office. Microsoft Office isn't really designed for that. You're better off with Photoshop.
We already, Fiona asks, we already have an Office 365 account with Telstra. How do we move over to the donated software version?
So at our conference this year, Brian from Microsoft was talking about this offer, and Telstra are going to match the pricing, the charity offer. So there's the $0 E1 plan, but Microsoft is still working out the mechanics with Telstra of that. So at this point in time, contact your Telstra account representative, and we'll provide updates when we have them.
Christine asks, their computers are currently on Windows 7. Will they need to buy Office 365 for each computer, or a license for how many computers?
So with this version of 365, the E1 plan, you would need to get a user account for each user that needs to use it, not per computer. So you won't actually have to buy anything unless you need the E3 plan. So the E1 plan is free. You sign up once for your organisation, and then you can allocate each user an account. They get access to all of the tools that are available to them. You can also limit what tools they have available to them if you particularly wanted to. I had an organisation the other day who wanted to provide volunteers with access to 365, but they only wanted their volunteers to have access to email and Lync. So they were able to add those security settings in. So that's fine. The only thing that you might need to buy in your case, Windows 7 would be fine, but you might want to buy Office 2013.
Glenn asks, if we purchase a new computer, do we have to have Office 2013, or can we get Office 365 straight away?
No, so it depends on how you want to do it. Office 2013 is not compulsory to use Office 365. Certainly a lot of people will get by just fine using Office Online. Office Online, for most users, is able to do most of what you need to do. If you're a power user, you probably still want the desktop client and do some extra formatting things, but in general, it totally depends on your use. So if you ordered a new computer and the user that wanted to use that new computer was quite happy with Office Online, you could just let them use Office Online and you wouldn't need to buy a license of Office 2013 at all. If that user was more of a power user and they particularly wanted the desktop client, then you'd need to order Office 2013. The other thing that comes into that kind of question is how much you use Excel, because again, more power user Excel users who spend all day, every day in their spreadsheets may want a desktop client of Excel.
Is it easy to upgrade from E1 to E3?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Now, this question is from Ruth and Christine. With the assessments, do they come to your office, and can Info Exchange do the transition and support, or do they just advise?
So Info Exchange can do the migration and support if you're in Australia. In New Zealand, they'd refer you to one of their partners over there that's able to do it for you. What we've done is we've developed essentially a questionnaire, a survey type tool to go through, and they're able to provide you with additional support if you get into trouble with that. In most cases we've found that works fine, but the best thing to do would be to have a look at it and then we're happy to provide additional help if you require.
Glenn asks, the company they are working for will migrate to the Office 365 soon. He asks, can I have the NFP and the company 365 on a single device?
I'm guessing you mean the Exchange account, in which case, yes, there's nothing stopping you from having multiple Exchange accounts on one device.
Does the other party that we're sharing with, sharing files with, have Office 365 too?
Do they have to have Office 365? No, no. And once you've got 365 set up, it's not a matter of having 365 then, it's just a matter of using the web-based tools that are in front of you. It's not as though you have to install Office 365 on every computer in your organisation. It's a matter of accessing the website. If you want to install anything on your computer, you can install Office 2013, which again, like I said, is more to do with power users these days.
Mike asks, are there any situations where you still need to retain a physical file server if moving to Office 365?
Totally depends, again, on your organisation. I know that I keep saying it and it sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but there are circumstances where you might want to keep an on-premise server for file storage. You might need those files synced locally for some reason. You may store really big video files and you need them locally. I do a fair bit of video editing and I certainly wouldn't want to deal with video files stored in the cloud. You need much higher speed storage than that. Some organisations want to retain Active Directory server on premise, so that's another reason why you might want to do it as well. Some organisations would need an on-premise server for SQL server. They might have big databases. So there's a number of reasons why you might want to retain some form of in-office server, and Microsoft has certainly considered that, and the ability to do that Active Directory integration allows you to do that. The other thing that you can do at the same time is you can migrate that physical server to separate cloud setup. So for example, SQL Server isn't currently supported by 365, so you could set up a cloud Windows server to run SQL Server on. I hope that's relatively clear, but it depends on what you want to do with that on-premise server. There are certainly cases where you may want to keep one on-premise.
Glenn asks, if you are working on a document in an isolated location and the internet drops off, is it all your work saved?
Yeah, it saves as you go through it, but if you're working in a remote location, what you might want to consider is syncing a particular file directory from OneDrive onto your computer before you go. That way you won't have to deal with potential dropouts and potential issues around that.
If you're using a trial version and Microsoft have approved charity status, how do we pay for these?
For the E1 plan you don't. For the E3 plan there's a billing section in Office 365 that allows you to set all of that up.
Glenn asks, how many devices can a single user use? For example, he has 5 devices that he regularly uses.
I don't think there's a limit on the number of devices a particular user can use, partially because it's so driven by the web. In a lot of cases you'll just be connecting to the website through different devices, but there's no limit on the number of devices you can check Exchange on, for example.
Jan asks, how do we know if we're signed up to the E1 plan or another version of 365?
Does that mean you're already registered for 365, Jan? If you're already registered, Yep, you are, okay. I'm guessing that's through Telstra then if it's pre-existing. So I'd probably check in your control panel, in your admin panel. It'll show which plan you're on at the moment. Hopefully it's E1 or E3.
Can you use Office Online with no internet connection?
No. That would be an example where you need Office 2013 and you sync down that OneDrive folder, make sure that you've got all your files ready to go.
Christine wants to know, do people come out to your office to do the assessment?
No.
And Mel asks, can we share our 365 software with remote volunteers?
Yeah, you can allocate your volunteers particular user accounts, and like I was saying before, you can allocate them different levels of access to the tools in Office 365. So for example, you may not want them to have any access to OneDrive. You can just remove that completely, but it's a great tool for being able to communicate with volunteers in remote areas via email, via Lync, and in some areas where there is no bandwidth, that phone backup option for Lync for video conferencing becomes really, really useful.
Mike asks, is there an admin account interface for Office 365?
Yes, there is, and you can also allocate admin rights to different users. So you might need 3 admin users, for example, and you can go through the user panel and you can allocate those as appropriate.
Ruth asks, can Info Exchanges advise us if we need to keep a server and at what level?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, all of these questions that I keep saying is down to your specific use case. That's where having the readiness assessment, they can look at what you're doing with your current server and which parts of your current server are best migrated to 365, which parts are best kept in-house, and it may be that it's a matter of moving different tasks off that server at different points and doing a phased implementation depending on your requirements.
And Christy asks, can we use our existing organisational emails on Exchange, or do we have to use a Microsoft email that is created for us?
When you first register with Office 365, Microsoft will allocate you a domain to try in the meantime. And that domain will be something like your organization name .onmicrosoft.com. And what you can do is you can validate your domain with Microsoft, and there's a little bit of technical step required here to update the records on your domain to allow it to happen. But once you've got it set up, yeah, you can absolutely use your existing organization domain, and when you do the migration, you can migrate those existing users and existing mailboxes over, so there's no interruption and no change in your email addresses.
Christine would like to know how the assessment is done. If they pay $100, how is the assessment achieved?
So what the assessment involves is basically based on the experience that we've got with Office 365, we go through a questionnaire on what you're doing with your current IT environment, where it's at. Once the questionnaire has been received, we go, Info Exchange go through it and look at what you're doing with the existing infrastructure, and they'll get in touch with you if they've got any questions around that. And then what they'll do is they'll send you the report and talk to you about the findings of the report and where you want to go from there. So it's a completely customized report based on exactly what your current IT environment is, and it's really designed to provide you with the signposts to dictate where you're going to take Office 365 and how you're going to make the migration if you decide to make the migration.
Sue asks, what happens if a user leaves the organisation?
You can delete the email address, you can disable the email address. change the password and redirect it to another user. It's very similar to current policies around if a staff member leaves, what you do with their mailbox. Alright, well that brings us to the end of the time. If we have any last questions, feel free to send them through now. Otherwise, I'm happy to follow up with people after the webinar on specific questions. And the other thing is, I believe it's next week, Christine, we've got another webinar from Marcus at InfoExchange, and Marcus will be providing more technical side of making the migration. So particularly if you are really keen on migrating to 365, we'll send out the link to that webinar in the follow-up email after this. And that might be, if you like what you've seen today in terms of what Office 365 can do, that might be a good webinar to sit into and see what the next steps are for your organisation. So have we got any last questions?
No, that's it for now. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you for everyone for participating today. As Ryan said, our next webinar on Office 365 will be next Thursday with InfoExchange. So if you have any further questions in regards to migrating to Office 365, please attend this webinar. We will be sending out a link to the slides and the recorded webinar, so you will receive that. But that's all, so I hope you've enjoyed this and have a lovely day.